Sarah Wanamaker with OrganRep.com discussing Aaron David Miller's Festive Gloria. This is a newly composed piece and has a publication date of 2012. And it's also a bit of a humbling piece because it started out as an improvisation done by Dr. Miller. Dr. Miller was performing a recital at the American Evangelical Lutheran Church in Scottsdale, Arizona, and improvised this piece on a theme submitted by Director of Music James Klein. The theme is based on a Gloria for a part of a liturgy, and I'm going to play the theme for you now and a few measures of the piece so you get a sample of what the piece is like. The theme. So as you can tell from hearing the piece, a lot of the energy and a lot of the excitement of the piece derives from the rhythmic use and the use of a motoric rhythm. And to this end, it's important that in preparing this, that you use every tool that you have in your toolbox to be so careful with your rhythm. If you take away the rhythmic exactness or the preciseness, I think the excitement of the piece will be diminished because you no longer have the exactitude of the rhythmic element. To this end, I think this is very important in the rhythmic motive that happens at the beginning. So this syncopated rhythm comes in on beat 1 a lot. Here in measure 1, or in measure 5, or in measure 9. And in each of those times, I think it's really important to emphasize the syncopation and almost put an agogic accent on that, because you want to almost make people wait for it, and then that will increase the strength of that rhythm. Along those same lines, I also think that it's very important to use the pedal to emphasize the rhythm and to emphasize the piece. And Dr. Miller doesn't really include a lot of articulation instructions, but I think it's important to put a lot of space in between the notes. And I'm going to demonstrate that playing measures, starting at measure 5, and put a reed on the pedal so you can hear just how much space is really needed to provide some emphasis and the under support for the piece. Overall, the harmony is one of a very comfortable postmodern context. So you always know where your tonic is, you always know where you are in relation to the chord, and the chord structures are familiar chord structures. And at the same time, Dr. Miller includes a lot of unusual dissonances. For instance, the opening bar starts on an F major chord, but the first note is actually has an added second. The first cadence in measure 4 is on a 5 chord on a C major, but has an added 4th. And typically we think of an added 4th as being a suspension so that the 4th would resolve to the 3rd. But in this case, the 4th doesn't resolve. We're just allowed to sit and experience that dissonance. So here's the first cadential chord. And even at the end, the very last cadence is kind of an unusual cadence. The penultimate chord is a minor 5/7 chord that resolves to the 1. So, and that's a little different. And so here's the final cadence. So I think those are all examples of how the harmony is very traditional in some senses, but yet very unusual and surprising in other senses. The registration of the piece is pretty standard, so it's a principal chorus, mixtures, added trumpets. On this instrument, I'm lucky enough to have a lot of trumpets that can serve as solo instruments, and so even though it's not indicated in the registration, I like to include the solo trumpets to feature those as part of the piece. And I encourage other people, even though it's not necessarily written in, to use this as a solo trumpet tune as well. Soloing out the trumpet also helps a little bit. On page 5, on measure 25, there's some really awkward times. If you're trying to play everything on one manual, your hands cross in a really unusual way. So just soloing out the trumpet line completely helps your hands stay out of the way from bumping into each other, and it helps in many places, most notably 25. Also, I noticed in measure 28, there's a D flat in the pedal and a D natural in the hands. And I thought that this kind of dissonance is actually really uncharacteristic for the piece. And so I actually play the D flat also in the hands just to be a little bit more consistent with the harmonic character. The one last thing that I really appreciate about this piece is the use of the Zimbelstern at the end, and I think it's a really good reminder that we should use the Zimbelstern to its effect more often in our registration, and so this is a good reminder to do so. Overall, I think it's not a terribly technically demanding piece. I think you could actually learn this in a few very well-focused practice sessions, and I appreciate Dr. Miller that he actually uses the vocabulary, musical vocabulary and musical elements from high art music, and at the same time he also references musical elements from a more popular style, and I think that he blends those together very nicely and makes this a really engaging piece, and I would encourage this as a very excellent addition to your postlude repertoire.